Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Lovely to see you all. I'm glad you made it here in person. And for Zoom people, we got, there was a few people that, slipped us a little cash to get them to Zoom, even though we said in person only. So here we are, best of both worlds. Making everybody happy because we have such a rock star here with us today, Mr. Spierer. You all know well. I'm so excited because I haven't seen Spierer since I was team leader 7 years ago. So this is a great treat, and I look forward to hearing all the ways that we can stay out of trouble. So Stephen, it's all yours.
Thank you. Good morning, ladies.
Good morning.
So raise your hand if you've not seen this speak before. So just a few. All right. So you'll see this very quickly how this works. Think of this as a 1-hour consultation with a real estate attorney that someone else is paying for. And so ask anything you'd like about real estate law, about the forms, about the Department of Real Estate, what gets you sued. If you have a difficult client in progress, we can talk about that. If you have had a problem in the past if you've had an event in the past that you think, I wonder if I did that right, or I wonder if that's going to be a problem, you talk about that. And there's no limit on this. What sometimes happens is people will start a question, we'll have 5 or 6 questions on the subject. That doesn't mean you can't just raise a new question right away. So my only question of you is, who has the first question? Right here. Good morning, Seth.
Good morning, how are you?
I'm well, thank you.
What, if any, is your experience currently with tenants, evictions, rent, a moratorium, and so whatever? I'd like to hear your experience with it right now and your thoughts about it.
So the first thing that happens is that people want to know, when's the rent moratorium up, because on that day, obviously we can go in the next day and evict people. And I don't even know when the rent moratorium currently ends. Does anybody actually know that?
It's 1 year after the end of the emergency.
So is the emergency over?
No, it's not.
Oh, so the year hasn't even begun. Okay, so I don't even keep up on that because it doesn't make any difference, and here's why. If we heard an announcement from every governmental official this morning that said the moratorium is over, the courts are smashed and broken. There is no way that they're going to get caught up quickly on the backlog, because before COVID, if you looked at the court system handling evictions, it looked like, remember Lucy and Ethel and the candy conveyor?
Yeah.
Remember that? That's what it looked like at the time. Now, if you go back, the room is just full of chocolate to the top and everybody is just buried. So they have all the cases that were in process that would have gone through and stopped. They have all the cases that would have normally happened in the last 2 years that have stopped. And they have all of the additional cases they have because COVID led to people, COVID and the government's reaction led to people not paying rent. So the massive backup is beyond comprehension. Add to this, the fact I just heard that the Griffith Observatory, which was closed during COVID, is now open just Saturdays and Sundays. Why? The executive director of the Griffith Observatory says we can't find enough people to operate it more than Saturday or Sunday. We can't find the employees. And you see help wanted signs everywhere. It's hard to find people to do things. If you've been to a nice restaurant recently, they're not as nice because they don't have the staff. They aren't doing things. They can't find the people. So the court system's having the same problem. A number of judges, significant number of judges retired. Court attendants, bailiffs, court clerks have retired or left or moved away or aren't coming back to work. They're just saying, I don't want to do this. So the result is the status of it, the status of evictions and the moratorium is it's a mess. It's going to be a mess. It will continue being a mess for some time yet to come. So what do? When you are a landlord, the position that we took, we are resident. not my law office, we have a separate business where we create investments in real estate for friends and family and clients. And we own a 2,566 apartment units in 4 states. And we manage them ourselves. We have a management company with about 110 employees, and that's what we do there. And the position that we took when this started, before there was any moratorium at all, is we told all of our resident managers that the tenants are not the enemy. The tenants are our clients, our customers. And so we're going to put our arm around them and say, we're not evicting anyone right now. This is what resident managers told tenants. These are the recommendations I made to clients in the law office. We're not evicting anyone right now. We're in this together. We'll get through it together. If you can pay the rent, pay the rent. If you can't pay the rent, don't pay the rent. If you can pay half the rent, pay half the rent. If you can pay the rent this month, it doesn't mean you'll be able to pay it next month. If you can pay the rent, but you'll be food insecure, don't pay the rent. We aren't evicting you. We're going to work together on this. Now, eventually, we're going to want you to pay every single dollar of rent. So do not unnecessarily dig yourself a hole, but we're not charging late fees. We're not evicting anyone. We're not charging interest. We'll work with you. The only thing you have to do is communicate with us when you don't pay the rent. So if you pay the rent, you don't need to call. If you aren't paying the rent, call us. And we didn't do this by email. It was either by telephone or in person, 6 feet away with masks or whatever it was. We had conversations with people. We invited communication. And the result was that our occupancies never dropped below, I believe the worst month we had was we had something like 88% of the people paying rent. But typically we were up in the mid-90s, 94, 95%. And the normal rent collection for us is about 98. Nationwide, in the 60s. So what we found is, by contrast, when people called us as lawyers, they didn't call us for that type of therapeutic advice. They called us to say, my tenant is not paying rent and I want to evict them. And our answer was, no, don't do it that way, do it this way. And some of them listened, most of them didn't. And so they send threatening letters, they do all sorts of things. And then the tenants finally give up, they're discouraged, they don't pay any rent, and eventually they leave, move away, owing you thousands or tens of thousands of dollars. So the suggestion we're giving the landlords is the same one we've given all along, which is handle this as a business transaction with someone who is your customer and who chose you, it chose your building to live in, they probably would like to stay in the inn. Make it clear that they will have to pay the rent in full someday. Every dollar of it, there'll be no discount, unless you want to give them a discount. And in the meantime, be friendly. People are frightened. People are, back then, were very frightened. They're frightened of the economic impact of everything that's going on. And so you put your arm around them rather than show them a knife. Short question, long answer. You'll see a pattern here because my mother always said, generally speaking, Stephen is generally speaking. Who has the next question? Including Zoom. Natalie will tell us when we have someone on Zoom who wants to ask the question. And by the way, I can talk for the whole time by myself, but I think it'll be much more interesting to you if you draw me to talk about things that are of interest to you. This is the part where we wait a few seconds to see who has the next question. There we are.
I'm hearing about the new requirement for inspection of balconies for condos and for apartments. And how is that playing out? Because it's relatively new. And I've got a friend who's dealing with it in her HOA and they're all arguing about it. I was gonna have a client make an offer on 4 units that has a balcony. We kind of backed off. What are you seeing out there with regard to that?
So I think many of you have seen my son, Joe Spierer, who is a licensed architect. He's been here. He has 10 architects working for him, and he's talked to you guys about architecture and how it integrates with what you're doing. And when he saw this rule first coming up, he had to, as an architect, look at it and say, is this a service I want to render? Is this something I want to do? So he looked into it. We talked about it. I had several clients who engaged us to figure out what this meant and how it worked. And here's what I concluded. This is a boondoggle. This is something which is designed to create an opportunity for expert witnesses to charge a great deal of money to inspect something and certify something. It's not really going to do any benefit for anybody because you can't look inside the walls. You can't. You certify the balcony. What are you saying? I jumped on it, or how are you testing a balcony? And so what we're finding is that there are people who will charge a fee to certify a balcony. I don't think it means much. I don't think anybody can certify a balcony. Joe and 3 other licensed architects that we represent have all drawn the conclusion this is not something they want to do. Because they can't responsibly say, yeah, you can rely on this. If I give you a legal opinion on something, you can rely on it. If I'm wrong and I fell below the standard of duty of care, you can sue me for malpractice. It's the same thing as when a doctor or a realtor or a CPA malpractices. If you fall below the standard of duty, you're responsible. So I think the answer is going to be that you can get, if there's a requirement for certification, it's required by law, you're going to find somebody who can get it and they're going to charge whatever they charge to do it. And you'll have that. But as a realtor, what you want to do is say to the buyer, this certification, and this falls in the category of disclosure. And those of you who remember this, I have a 3-part magic formula, not magic words, but magic formula for disclosure. Here's what I've observed. I don't know what it means. I urge the buyer to investigate. So it would be, here's what I've observed in the living room on the north wall near the west wall close to the ceiling is a 7-inch crack. I do not know what caused this crack or whether it's important or not. I urge the buyer to investigate it. Here's what I've seen. Here's what I've observed. I don't know what it means. I urge the buyer to investigate. If you want to get in trouble, say you know what it means. It turned out to be wrong. So if you're going to say you know what something means, what you should also say at the end of saying what it means is you should say, and if I'm wrong, I'll pay for the whole thing. Because that's essentially what you're doing. So now back to the balcony certification. When you get this balcony certification, I think what you should say, 1, 2, 3, is here is a balcony certification from so-and-so. I have no idea whether this balcony is sound or not sound. I urge the buyer to investigate the balcony with appropriate experts. You have then placed the buyer, whether you're the listing agent or the selling agent, you place the buyer on notice without insulting the person who gave the certification. You're placing them on notice that you don't have confidence. This didn't close the door for you. This didn't lead you to say, that's that with that. I know the balcony's fine. And you're suggesting that they do this. If you represent the seller, that's all you need to do, because your job, remember, as a listing agent is way different than your job as a selling agent. You disclose and you help the seller to disclose. So once you've said that, you're done. If you represent the buyer and you have a balcony and it's certified, or you get that disclosure from the listing agent, your job has begun, because your job is representing the buyer. It's way different than representing the sellers. You have a duty to help the buyer investigate anything, everything that's in the properties as disclosed and as discovered condition. So when you see the balcony certification, you should say to the buyer, I'm not sure this closes the door. Perhaps during the inspection, the inspector will have comments. If there are other things that constitute red flags that draw our attention to some question about the balcony, is there any evidence of water intrusion? And when we stand on the balcony, does it feel spongy? When we look at the balcony, does it appear to be deteriorating? We may want, in an extreme case, to have a structural engineer look at the balcony. In a lesser case, we may want to have a licensed contractor look at the balcony. Balconies are a problem for water intrusion in many places. If they're not built right over time, the water drains into the building and undermines the entire structure of the building, and it's a problem. Balconies are a risk. So to me, this rule, this regulation doesn't really help as much as it creates more confusion. But now you know how to deal with it. Thank you for asking.
Yes.
We have a question online.
Yes, Angel?
Angel, you are muted. Your hand is up, but you are muted, Angel.
Yes, good morning, Mr.
Good
Spierer.
morning.
No, I had a question regarding also, as it was raised by Sal Sorrentino earlier in the morning, about tenants' rights in a situation where at City of LA, there's a tenant that is very disruptive and is creating a lot of problems with the other tenants because of his behavior. Is that tenant subject to eviction because of that?
So the short answer is yes to that. Angel, thank you for the question. It's first of all, when you're a landlord or when you're advising landlords, you need to tell the landlord, remind the landlord, or remember as a landlord, you are not the parents, you're not the boss, you are not the police. You don't want to get roped into mediating disputes between neighbors. You don't want to get roped into a situation where you're exercising authority that you don't have, making decisions that you don't have, that you can't make, and that you can't enforce. So that's the first thing, is remember who you are as a landlord and who you are not. As a landlord, you have a number of duties. You need to provide a safe, proper, habitable space for rental. You need to maintain it properly. You need to do all the things you're supposed to do as a good landlord. But you're not supposed to solve problems between tenants. That's not part of what you're being asked to do by law or by your lease or even by custom. So the people who get involved in inter-tenant disputes are a problem. Having said that, if you can communicate or help someone communicate in a way that can help them diffuse the situation, calm it down, or get everybody arranged, that's great. But when one tenant calls you and says that other tenant next door is creating a noise problem, or they're smoking pot and it's all drifting into my unit, or they are leaving trash outside, or they're leaving the security gate open, or whatever it is, if it's something that violates a policy of your building, like leaving the security gate open, then you would say to the tenant, you need to close the security gate, you can't prop it open, it's not okay. Because that is your responsibility, because you're managing the property and you have a duty to make sure if there's a security gate that's functioning properly and isn't being subverted by someone who leaves it propped open and doesn't close it. But if it is that someone is too noisy next door, if you feel like it, you could get involved, but here's what I suggest you do instead. Say to the complaining tenant, have you spoken with them? If they say, no, I haven't, I don't want to antagonize them. What they're essentially saying to you is, here, landlord, put your head in here. You go antagonize them for me on my behalf. I don't think that's a good idea. I don't think that's a good idea. I think you say, you should talk to them. And if you believe their conduct rises to the level of the disturbance of the police, disturbance of the peace, call the police if you think there's a violation of the law. We don't have in the rules something that says everybody's got to be quiet. I don't suggest you have that in your rules. If you have a management leader, a resident manager, or a property manager, or if you are in a position where you really have the relationship with the tenants, where you can go and say to them, here's what's happening, I need your help to keep the sound down after 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night. If you can do that and do it effectively and successfully, then go ahead and do that. And this is a place where a mom and pop who's running a 4-unit might very well be able to do that, and it might make sense and it might work out well. But if you have a larger complex where you don't really know the tenants that well, and you don't have that relationship, or if you want to follow my general policy, which is you don't get into managing as a parent misbehaving children who are fighting with each other. Anyone who happens to have more than one child, you know the phenomenon I'm talking about. And so you don't want to get into that position with the tenants. And so I'm going to do that. Angel, did that answer your question? Is Angel still up? And is Angel, you're muted. There you go.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for the answer. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Absolute pleasure. So Nicole, had a question?
Stephen, this is Gordon.
Gordon.
I'm sorry. Yes, the COVID bug decided to bite me, so I'm home. Didn't feel it would be the proper thing to come to the meeting, obviously.
Well, no,
probably
stand back from the telephone too, if you would.
You got it. A couple questions, Steve. One, we're getting some offers, what they call blind offers, that people have not seen the property. I'd like to know something about that. And then secondly, when somebody puts in an assignment clause, you know, Joe Johns, or whatever it might be, and or assignee, and how do we deal with that? We're finding people buying these properties that are just buying them, full price, convert them into rentals. They don't even have to even see the property at all. So I'm a little bit concerned that we handle our situation, our side in the right way.
Did anyone happen to see the 60 Minutes piece on Sunday about corporate purchases? Raise your hand if you saw that.
I did.
So Gordon and Al saw it. So that's what, so here's what they were saying. There are corporate operators who have, the guy who they interviewed had 80,000 units in America, 80,000 units. And they're buying houses. They're not, these aren't apartment buildings. They're 80,000 houses in his company across the country. That's a staggering number. And they buy them and then they rent them out. And his explanation was, when he was asked by Leslie Stahl of CBS News, the American dream was to own a house. Aren't you destroying the American dream? His answer was, no, they have the American dream. They're just renting it. So that's what he's doing. And it'll be up to policymakers to decide what they want to do with that. If there's some sort of a policy, this is a very fraught area. It would be very difficult to draw a law that would explain what to do and give clear guidance. And if they did pass some sort of a law, it would be 10 years before you litigated it up and down through the Supreme Court and all the various states before you really understood what the law turned out to be. So when you get what you are getting are these blind offers where they haven't seen the property because they don't care. It doesn't matter. When they make an offer, they make certain financial assumptions about the property. And if they can buy the property, they buy it all cash. They'll close in 15 days. Very hard for a first-time homeowner to compete with that, because they'll just come in and offer many times full price, all cash, no contingencies, no inspections, close in 15 days. So let's take this from several points of view. There's the political point of view, and that's a topic I have lots of feelings about and glad to talk about some other day. But today, let's talk about what a realtor should do. If you're a listing realtor and you have an offer like that, you really need to turn to the seller and say, well, here's an offer. It's all cash. It's no contingencies. It's closing in 15 days. This person is probably buying this property institutionally and doesn't plan to occupy it. They probably intend to rent it out. This is part of a nationwide trend, and a number of large companies are doing this. And this offer may very well be the best offer you'll get, so you need to consider it. Then you'll say the next thing, which is the property has been on the market for 3 weeks. This is the only offer you've gotten, so that's probably something you should consider. Or you'll say, well, the property's been on the market for 15 minutes and we should wait and see if there are better offers, or. But what you're always doing, whenever you give advice to any client, ever, and this is the same thing I would tell parents about their children, whenever you're giving advice to anyone in life, ever, particularly when you're a realtor, it is always, on the one hand, on the other hand, always discussing risk. On the one hand, see me, when you think you're about to give clients advice, see me doing this. On the one hand, on the other hand, always discussing risk. So, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, we've gotten this offer, it's full price, it's all these things. On the one hand, the risk you take by accepting this offer right now is that there may be other higher offers. They won't be better in other ways. They might be as good, but they might not be. The risk you have in accepting this offer is that there might be higher offers that you could get more money. So that's the risk you have in taking the offer. The risk you have in not taking the offer is interest rates have gone up in the last 6 months enough on home prices that a home buyer could expect to pay considerably more for the same size loan on a house. The number I heard that I don't yet believe, I just heard it this morning, was 27% more on a house payment. I don't know if I believe that, and I'd be interested if somebody here knows, but it's higher, whatever it is, and it's going to be higher. And so the risk, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, you have in turning down this offer is you may not that you may not get as good an offer next day, week, and so forth. And then you work in the other facts as you're giving this advice. One of the reasons that you might want to wait for other offers is because your house is well located, it has great curb appeal, and the kitchen is beautiful, so it's going to be appealing. Or you might say, one of the reasons that you might consider taking this offer is because your house is located right next to the freeway and you don't have good curb appeal and your kitchen is ugly. And so you give advice based on the individual facts, and that's how you advise a seller on a blind offer. Some sellers will look at this and say, I have a moral opposition to selling to a buyer like that. And so the question is, can you discriminate against someone on the basis that they're a giant company? Can you discriminate against them on the basis that they're going to go ahead and rent it out, and the first-time home buyers won't do this if you believe this is bad and bad for the country or bad for first-time home buyers? Can you discriminate on that basis? The answer is yes. There's legal discrimination and illegal discrimination. Illegal discrimination is race, creed, color, national origin, religion, probably age, probably sex, probably sexual preference, probably a whole bunch of other things that are working their way through the court system, as we see and you know and you hear on the news. But some of them are very, very well settled. And so if it's ever a discrimination on the basis, for example, of race, that is illegal, that is wrong, that will be punished for that. That's a very bad thing. But there is nothing about, and because those are all what are called suspect classifications under the 14th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. It's a suspect classification if you ever make a decision in any direction for any reason on the basis, for example, of race. And a number of other categories. But there is no protected class of corporations or of mass landlords. They are not a suspect classification. So if you say, I don't want to do business with a giant company, you don't have to do business with a giant company, and no one will sue you for discrimination, for illegal discrimination, because it's legal discrimination. So if you have a client who says, I'm not going to sell to that buyer, I don't care if I sell for less, what you do is you say back to the client, so if I understand you correctly, even though this might be the highest and best offer that you get, and even though you may sell for less, on moral grounds, you're going to stand on principle and say no. And if they say that's right, then you say, okay. And what you would do in that case, because your job is not to make a moral judgment, your job is to give advice. What you would then say in that case, in my view, is my job is not to make a moral judgment. And if you feel like it, you can add, and I agree with you. If you agree with it, or I don't agree with you, if you don't agree with it. But it's not a question of what I think, it's a question of what you think. And what I'm going to do is tell you that just ice cold, having nothing to do with morality, having nothing to do with my views, your views, having nothing to do with public policy, my job as your realtor is to get you the best deal I can get you. And this deal looks really good because we listed the property at this because we expected someone would come in at or just below. And then you add the other facts, the ugly kitchen, or the property's been on the market for 10 days or 2 weeks or a month or whatever it is. And you say, for those reasons, I recommend that you consider this. And if you feel like it, you can add it, even though it makes me sick, if it does. But you say, I recommend that you consider this seriously because your next offers really might be less money. And if you make this decision and it turns out that it is less money, you're going to need to be a good sport about that. Now, are you sure? Are you clear? And if they say, yes, I'm clear, then what has happened is you have given advice which hasn't been followed. That is the trigger for what I call a CYA letter, cover your assets letter, okay? And so it's a 3-part letter, and it happens the only time you need to send a CYA letter is when you have given advice and it is not being followed. Given advice and it's not being followed. So for example, you would never say to a buyer in a letter, I recommend that you get title insurance, because they're going to. That's what they're going to do. You don't have to say it. It wasn't the case where they didn't follow advice. Not going to have to say to a buyer, I recommend you get a physical inspection of the property, because you will never, ever, 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 ever close an escrow without a physical inspection and a report from an inspector for that buyer. Even if it's been fallen out of escrow twice and there are 2 other reports, you give them those, but you make them get their own. So you'll never send a letter on that. But in this case, you would say a 3-part letter, send a 3-part letter to your seller, and it said, here's what I've recommended. Here's what you're doing instead. I urge you to reconsider because, once again, not magic words, but magic formula. Here's what I've recommended. Here's what you're doing instead. I urge you to reconsider because, and here's what it would sound like. And this is not a letter that comes out and sounds like, and if you don't listen to me, let it all be on your head. I won't be responsible. It's not what it sounds like, because it's not what it is. It's an embracing letter where you're doing your duty to your client. You are helping them understand your advice and making sure that they know it. You are also, by the way, protecting yourself from a lawsuit later if somebody forgets.
Just to piggyback on that specific thing, when you say a letter, it's, you also mean it can be an email, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and we can talk about delivery in a second, so we'll come back to that. So the letter would sound like this, and again, it can be a warm, embracing letter. It's not a letter that sounds like this. It's a letter that's supportive. I'm excited about selling your house, and it's nice that we've gotten this offer. As you know, my advice is that because it is all cash, 15 days, no contingencies, they're putting up a full 3% deposit. They are removing their contingencies. The CAR form CR is being used on the first day. So all their contingencies are gone. They've signed liquidated damages for this reason, combined with all these other reasons that the kitchen is ugly or it's been on the market or whatever the problems are. For all those reasons, I've recommended that you accept the offer. You have decided not to take this offer, and you've stated it's for personal and ethical reasons. I support your personal and ethical decisions. From a business point of view, as your realtor, I urge you to reconsider, because you may not get as good an offer from someone else. You may have a more complicated deal or actually sell the house for less. So I urge you to reconsider. You tell the client the letter is coming and explain the reason for the letter is because I want you to think about this seriously before we turn it down. Now you've done your job as an advisor. You fulfilled your fiduciary duty. You have truly given advice to your seller that will help them reflect and make their best decision. And you can say, I completely support your decision, whatever you make. You can say on a personal level, I agree with you completely, but I'm sending this to you as your realtor, but you need to do that. So that's on the blind, on the blind offer from someone like that. Now,
I'm just switching gears to another subject.
oh, let me go back and do this for a second. So on the same subject, go.
The same subject, but this time I seen on the listing agent on their remarks on the MLS say no blind offers. If this is legal or illegal to say that on the agent.
So then the other form of blind offer is someone who isn't a corporate giant who's buying a house to rent it out as part of a conglomerate. It is instead someone who's been shut out of several deals. They've tried to make offers, but they don't get there in time. And they're out of state or out of the area, or they can't get there on Tuesday, and they want to make an offer and they haven't seen the property. So there's a different kind of blind offer. And then it's a strategic question as to whether you would respond to someone who hasn't seen the property. I will tell you that in the commercial setting, it is not unusual to make offers on property you have not seen, because there's so much due diligence involved in buying a 200-unit apartment building or a 75,000 square foot industrial building or a shopping center or a 50,000 square foot office building. There's so much due diligence involved in that you don't want to spend the $30,000, $50,000, $60,000 that you spend on due diligence before you get an offer accepted, because you might spend it and then find out somebody else bought it, or they want too much money for it, or you can't buy it the way you want to. So it's not at all unusual to have in the commercial setting, including multifamily over 4 units, to have offers made by people who've never seen the property. We are now seeing it because of the now for several years historical hot market. We're seeing it in the single family residence condominium, townhouse, 4 units or less scenario where people are making offers on properties they haven't seen. It is strictly a business decision there as to whether the seller wants to take a chance on someone who hasn't seen it. So what I want to know from that buyer's agent is who's the buyer and why are they making an offer without seeing it? And if the answer turns out to be that they're in some other state and they plan to move here, they can't get here. I, the buyer's agent, have seen the property myself. I've taken pictures. I've sent them to them. And so they'll kind of, if they get it under contract, they'll then spend the money on an airplane ticket. They'll come here and they'll do this. I might consider that. But it's a business decision, and for the seller, it depends on what their other alternatives are. Remember, kitchen is beautiful, ugly kitchen. All of the various factors that would go into saying to a seller, on the one hand, on the other hand, this is the reason you should consider a blind offer, and these are the risks of considering a blind offer. Major risk in considering a blind offer like that is that they get it under contract and they don't buy it, but you're locked in for 17 days and maybe longer if there are bad players and they decide they're going to be ugly and difficult in getting the contract canceled. That's a risk. That's a risk.
Hey, Steve, Stephen, it's Gordon. Can I interrupt you
Gordon.
just 1 second?
Yes.
So recently I found out that an agent, they sold it blind, and then the buyer had the agent take a video of the property, closed escrow, and then sued the agent because they didn't do a good job on the video. So I don't think it's a great idea to take.
No, that
True
makes
story.
sense. So you have that's another angle. So let's talk about that. The selling agent, the buyer's representative, who is in this situation that Gordon described, where the buyer never sees the property. This is a place where what you have to do is give advice. And this is where you give advice, it isn't followed, so you write the 3-part letter. And this would be a heck of a 3-part letter. Okay, this is a letter that would say all the following. Remember, this is what I've advised, this is what you're doing. This is what you're doing instead. I urge you to reconsider because, and it would sound like this. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, you have congratulations on getting this property under contract. You now have 17 days to do all these inspections. Of course, I have said that you must come in person to visit the property, to meet with the property inspectors. They go through the property for several hours to make decisions, which I'll help you make. I'll give you advice on as to what other experts you might need. Roofers, licensed roofers, plumbers, electricians, architects, structural engineers, soils engineers, any variety of people who might have things to talk about, mold testing, all sorts of things. And you need this information in order to decide whether this property is appropriate for your ownership and occupancy. Instead, you've indicated that you're too busy or you're taking care of your sick grandmother or whatever the problem is. You've indicated that and you're not coming. This is alarming to me, and I urge you to reconsider, because one of the most important rights you have when you're purchasing a property is this right of investigation, this right of inspection. And if you're not here to supervise it, you may end up after the close of escrow discovering things that had you been here, you wouldn't have discovered. And if that happens, because the law says that you have a duty to investigate, you will fail to do that. And all of these problems would belong to you. So I urge you to reconsider, because buying a property in this way without coming personally and placing your eyes on it, even if you don't think you would know because you're a butcher or a baker or a candlestick maker, it's still your home and you need to see it. And if you don't, I'm very concerned that you may have experienced severe disappointment after the close of escrow. So that would be the answer, by the way, at the end of the close of escrow when the lawsuit arrives, as well. Let me show the plaintiff's lawyer, let me show the letter that was sent, and the questions of the buyer will be, so what did you do next? Well, I didn't do anything. Well, okay. And it shifts that burden, which comes back to your question about delivery of the letter. And so can it be by email? Sure. And when you send it, you want to send that letter with a copy to your manager, copy to your broker, copy to your operating partner, copy to yourself. So it shows, not a blind copy, but a copy, so that you have proof of delivery, because if everybody on that list says, yeah, I got it, and the buyer says, well, I never got that email, it's gonna be harder to believe. And I will tell you that in 44 years of practicing law, there have only been 2 occasions when someone said, well, I never got that letter. And in both occasions, they were shown to be lying. So I'm not so worried about proving you delivered the letter. Let me tell you what's happened more than twice. It's happened, oh, I don't know, hundreds of times where I say, did you send a letter? No, I didn't send a letter. I know I was supposed to, but I didn't send a letter. 100% of the time, when you give advice, it isn't being followed, send the 3-part letter. 100% of the time, no exceptions. It takes effort, but not nearly as much effort as it takes to talk to me while you're being sued.
What I found,
There was another question for you. Did I hit that second question? Gordon.
He's drinking with them. Give him a second.
All right,
He's
coming
writing a
back.
3-part letter.
There we go. And or assignee.
Oh, and or signing, thank you, I forgot that, thank you.
There is,
So-
excuse me, one second, Steve, there is an assignment of agreement addendum that I think is critical. And we should make it mandatory in our office, because people are doing and or assignee and then just assign it in escrow without any knowledge of who they're assigning it to. The
Yeah,
seller has no knowledge, we have no knowledge. So I think that's important that we watch out for that little signal there.
that's right. Well, in the old days, and I don't mean all that long ago, you would write that the buyer is Gordon Inman or assignee, and everybody said fine, and it didn't make any difference. And so they just did that. But trouble arose because the assignee would step into the buyer's shoes and then say, well, I didn't get my disclosure rights. I didn't get those things that other person never sent them to me, and here's the lawsuit. So now there's a form that needs to be filled, and anytime you're going to use it, you have to use that, because otherwise you're not going to know who that buyer is. It's not that you're going to refuse to allow the assignment. You just need a document, and the CAR form works very well for this, that effectively says that you're stepping into the shoes of that buyer number 1, and that you're relying on buyer number 1 to give you everything that we gave buyer number 1. So it's a protective document, and that's why you do it. Document forms are not the enemy, forms are your friend. They're like seatbelts.
Is it acceptable to counter no assignees?
You could, why would you? How is that to the benefit of the seller? Same thing about no blind offers. How is that to the benefit of the seller? That's the question to always ask yourself whenever you are inserting something that's not standard, like no blind offers or no assignees, is how does this help? Why does this matter? I'm open to anybody. As anybody can think of a reason why you would say no assignees. Go.
I do a lot of like new construction project teardown.
Nice
stuff.
and loud for the microphone.
I do a lot of new construction stuff, and we use assignees because during escrow, it's changed like the LLC of the project, but it's the same signer, the same buyer, similar entity.
Right, it's a buyer who then forms an LLC that they
Right.
own,
And
and
it's
so it's
just-
not, there's no difference
So we
there.
just disclose that, but I do get a lot of pushback on it.
From-
And they want it disclosed that.
Pushback from sellers? or-
Yeah, you
okay.
know, occasionally, who is this buyer? We don't want any wholesalers. We do run into a lot of like wholesaling, and I would say, if somebody gave me an and or assignee, I would want to know what the purpose of that assignment would be. That would be the advice I would give to my seller, because I see so much of the wholesale stuff come through.
But why does a seller care if it's going to a wholesaler, unless we're back to the moral issues I was talking about
Well,
earlier?
because then they're selling it while it's in escrow for a markup.
Well, then we should have the property listed
Right.
now for what it will sell. If it's underlisted, then that's not good, and that's the thing to fix. It's not a matter of preventing an assignment, it's a matter of properly listing and marketing. the
But a lot of
property.
times they don't get their higher price, and then they're just causing all kinds of muckiness in between, and they sometimes fall apart, especially in this market right now.
Okay, all right,
So-
good point.
Yeah, I see a lot of the wholesaling issues. It's still happening, but it's also a matter of if it's was more common in the buyer's market, right? Then you can
Yes.
have, because they dictate the terms, and then I
Yes.
just want to sell the property. Today, you can definitely push back because it's actually very suspicious today why you're gonna have an or assignee, right? Just, even if it's like an investor, what have you, and they have LLC, they can assign the property during the escrow for whatever reasons, and escrow can fix everything up.
Yeah.
But it doesn't serve the interest ideally of the homeowner if it's just like a simple, resale, let's say, property of some kind.
Okay, all right, good point.
But
Let's go here and then there, and then who else had a hand up? And then there, okay. We're gonna run out of time. All right, put your hands up if you have questions. And I'm gonna number you, and then we'll just go back to 1, 2, 3. Are you?
Yeah, no, so I'll let-
No, please. 1, you're 2, you're 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Remember your numbers. 1.
Going back to the 3-part letter, in helping the agents with their disclosures and issues, I often find them saying just what you said. I know I should have done that, but I didn't. I felt uncomfortable. I was embarrassed to kind of challenge my seller. This is what I've suggested. I'd like your opinion, make sure I'm not out of bounds, is I'll tell my client, geez, I need for you to sign this or to acknowledge this, because my office wants to see that I explain this to you properly to help you make your decision.
And you're saying you would explain that as to the seller?
To the seller or actually to a buyer or seller, where you're saying, hey, you waived this right, and I'm concerned for you, and I need you to acknowledge that my advice is this.
And then
And sometimes-
to explain why you're sending.
Right. My
Sure.
office wants to see that I.
Introduce the letter if you want to, and say, I'm gonna send you a letter, and the purpose of the letter is to have you think a second time. And I wanna have it very clear, so I'll send you a letter on this. I'll ask you to just email me back saying, got it, and here's my decision. Here's my final decision. I'll accept your final decision. I think that's right.
Yeah, sometimes they say, well, why do I have to do that? And rather say, so I can protect my assets. I say, the office wants to know, wants to see that I advised you properly.
One of the hardest things for a professional to do, and this is something where it really takes actual courage defined as not being unafraid. If you're not afraid, there's no courage involved in that. But being afraid and taking action in the face of fear. So courage defined as action in the face of fear. The fear is your seller, your client, your buyer will be upset with you. That's the fear. And the action is telling the truth. And if you tell the truth to your client in the face of fear that the client will be disappointed or maybe fire you, you'll never be sorry. You'll never be sorry. Because typically what will happen is that client will be crazy about you. They will trust you. They will know. They might be angry in the moment, but they will know they can count on you for the truth. And you will find that when you've been doing this for years and years, you won't be tired of it because you won't feel like you're swallowing yourself. If you tell your clients the truth in the face of fear that they'll be angry, disappointed, or will fire you, you'll find sometimes they do, but almost, in my experience, 99.9% of the time, they will be upset in the moment, they'll speak strongly, and then you will be their professional for the rest of their lives because they'll know you'll actually tell them the truth. And do the right thing. Sir.
Yeah, that's one of my openers. I tell my clients that I have to be able to be completely honest with you, even if you get angry with me. Otherwise, it's not going to work well.
Correct.
I need to be able to be without a filter.
Correct.
Anyone that knows me, I have no filter. Question, I have a property that's for sale. I have 3 escalation clauses.
So let's talk about escalation clauses. Do you have a specific question or should I talk?
No, that's.
So here's the idea. What you say when a buyer, you're the listing agent, right?
Yes.
Okay, so when you are, if you are the buyer's agent and you can get a listing agent to go with an escalation clause, that's great. That's really great for the buyer because you fooled the listing agent and you're going to probably have a big advantage in getting that house. So go right ahead and do it if you are the buyer and you can get some listing agent to do it. Well, that should tell you what I think of the listing agent to do. And that is don't ever, 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 ever agree to it. The best thing that will happen is you do no good. The worst thing that will happen is you'll end up in a lawsuit. So an escalation clause is where the buyer says, look, you go ahead and market the property, and then whatever you get, I'll beat it by $10,000 or $100,000, whatever, up by 10%. I've seen them all different ways. That's what an escalation clause is. This is of no advantage to the seller whatsoever. It doesn't do a thing. Because what happens, first of all, it's not binding on the buyer. The buyer can say it, and then when they hear the price, they go, okay, I'm out. So it's not binding on the buyer, it doesn't do anything. Second, if the buyer really is that motivated, tell them, hey, put your best foot forward. And when they come back, having asked for an escalation clause, when they come back and say, okay, here's my offer. You say, and if I sell it to someone else for $15,000 more, is that okay with you? Why? You have an offer? No, but I'm just asking, is that your best foot forward? If you want to improve your offer, now would be the time. If you're at a place where you say, I don't care, if I can't get it for that, I'm out, then you've made a good offer. And this is the advice that buyers need to give to buyers agents need to give to buyers when you're talking about what price to offer. It is, again, on the one hand, on the other hand, always talking about risk. Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, which of these alternatives do you hate more? Do you hate more the risk of overpaying for the property, or do you hate more the risk of not getting the property? And they say, well, I want to get the property, but I don't want to overpay. Well, that's a great starting place. That's where you expect them to start. And then you explain that if you fail to prioritize, you might experience disappointment. And what you find is that people who've been shut out of 2 or 3 properties already, they're going to say, my biggest fear that I don't want is not getting the property. I'm fine with overpaying, as long as I can afford it. And you'll find that typically someone who hasn't been shut out will say, well, I'm not going to overpay. I want a deal. Not only do I not want to overpay, I want a deal on the property. I want a good price. All right, they're not going to get that property in this market at this time. This is all going to shift soon. But in this market, they're not going to get it. And when someone says, no, my priority is I want this property, and if I overpay, I'm okay with that. Then when they say, this is how much I want my offer to be, your advice would be, well, if you don't get it, and you find out someone else got it for $25,000 more, would you say, fine, no problem? Or would you say, boy, I wish I'd offer $25,000 more? Because if you have that wish, make that offer now. And that's the advice. And this is the same thing that the listing agent says when someone says escalation clause. And the answer is, great, glad to hear it. I'll help you all I can. Here's my best advice. Make your best offer the first time out, because there may not be a second chance.
And just to add to that part, I just had an agent from a different office that had the same situation with the buyer side. And I mean, it's a tough market, as you know. So what they did, they put the escalation clause, like, I think 5,000 above whatever, but they also capped the purchase price.
If you're the listing agent, don't fall for it. Don't ever take an escalation clause. There are no exceptions to this. I've seen it. But remember, when I see it, it's not that the deal just got messed up. It's there's a lawsuit, right? And I've seen a bunch of escalation clauses result in lawsuits because that buyer says, wait a minute, I had an escalation clause, or someone else says, I didn't get the deal because you agreed to something that wasn't right. That's a weaker lawsuit, but still, who needs it? Okay, number 3 right here.
I have it's 2 parts, but I think it's gonna be pretty quick. And then I had a question about something else you had said that I hope is really quick if possible. Is there currently a hold on rent increases in LA City?
Yes. Yes.
And it expires at the same time that the rent?
Again, I haven't looked into it because what's going to happen when it finally expires is they're going to change the rules 6 times more. The reason I don't look into it is because anytime a client asks me that question, I say, don't hire me to research this unless it's going to happen right now, because you're wasting your money, because when it finally happens, they're going to make up new rules. We'll have to research those too. So I don't know any of those answers about what's going to happen in the future. Currently, there's a phrase.
Okay. And then the second question I had, when you were talking about there being an issue between tenants, I'm on an HOA board, there's 64 units. There's a tenant who is.
A tenant, not an owner, but a tenant.
She might be an owner. Let's say she's an owner.
Let's say she's an owner.
There's a tenant downstairs. If she's too afraid to talk to him, then what happens?
This is not your problem. If someone is having a personal problem with someone else out there on Western Avenue, if you would be the sort of person who would run up and say, well, let me mediate this, ow, you're hitting me, oh, you're hitting me, I'm in trouble here. Then you would go help. If you insert yourself into that conflict, you need to, if you start it, you need to finish it, and it's very, very difficult, and you don't have the authority. You're not the boss, you're just the homeowners association. So if you're violating an HOA rule, then there's a question of whether you need to enforce it, and that depends on what the rule says and what it is. So, but I would say, if you're too afraid, you should hire a lawyer and let your lawyer talk to that tenant. You should call the police if you think a crime is, let the police officer talk to that tenant. Go get a lawyer, go get a, but you don't, as the homeowners association, we represent a large number of them. We would tell you to never get involved in that. Okay, you're on
Real
your
quick,
feet, so I have a limited time.
Are you guys okay with going a little bit over?
Yes.
We do have some like quick announcements after as well. I just want to get your permission before we continue.
And let me give anyone permission who needs to go. I won't be offended if you have to leave again. I won't even know if you folks.
Thank
on
you
Zoom
so
will.
much.
Send a letter. Send a letter.
Yes.
Send a letter.
Three-part letter.
Okay, question
Four,
1, 2,
four.
3,
I'm
4,
four.
4, go ahead.
So with the new contract, the RPA, it looks really good and I've used it several times already. Is there anything coming up with it that you're having?
Not yet. And every time they come out with the major change, the last major change in the RPA was, I want to say 2007, was it? Or was it earlier than that? That they eliminated the warranties, remember? They had created all that confusion with as is, and there's no such thing.
Before 07.
Was
Yeah,
it? Oh,
it
yeah.
was way
So you're
before.
telling me I'm older than I was.
We are.
I don't know, some things change. I still have a full head of hair and a flat stomach, so I. When they made a major change, like getting rid of warranties and creating all the confusion with as is, it still has people getting in trouble now with as is. No, I haven't seen it, but we won't for a number of years. That's my answer. As lawsuits begin to trail in and they get litigated, we won't even know that unless I personally see them or talk to lawyers who consult. We have a lot of lawyers call us to help them with other cases, so we get to see more than we would just see in our own office. But before we get any appellate decisions or subsequent legislation or changes from CAR, it's going to be a long time. But no, I'm not seeing any trouble yet. No, question number 5. Who had 5? Al.
I think I was right.
I think you were.
You triggered me with 2 words, discrimination and a letter. I've been plagued by agents that are under my umbrella who show me, I nickname it a mush letter.
Yeah.
To the
The love
seller
letter.
of the property,
Yeah.
love letter, mush letter, whatever you want to
Yeah.
call it. And now I hear that it's discriminatory to have a letter accompanying your offer,
Yeah.
describing Bob and Mary and their dog Spot, and we love your house, all of that stuff. Is that a violation now?
So no, here's what, it's a potential problem because let's assume that the photograph they send of their family shows that their family looks like this.
Right.
And this is intended to supersede another offer where the family looks like this. And so somebody could be trying to get an advantage by showing that they are of one race or another, or they're gay or straight, or they have children or don't have children, that they're this or that, or they're all kinds of things. And there are always plaintiffs' lawyers who are looking for cases. And so this is something that some of the lawyers are trying to get traction on. This has happened over the decades. Remember 21 years ago when mold had been on our planet for 16 million years, but the plaintiffs' lawyers discovered it. So now it's deadly mold. And so there are some deadly molds, and there are some people who are highly vulnerable, but that population is very, very narrow. It's a very small number, and yet we had tens of thousands of mold cases throughout the state. So, and this has happened with asbestos, it's now happening with habitability on tenants' apartments. It's a cottage industry for the lawyers who can then sue because they got a law passed through their lobbyists that then makes something available or gets attorney's fees for something and so forth. So So there are some lawyers who are trying to create discrimination cases. I am not saying there is not discrimination. Of course there is. There is discrimination, and it's hateful and it's wrong and it's illegal. But the lawyers are making the thing larger, even larger than it actually is, and making the problem worse. So here's my advice. The opposite of what it is on escalation clauses. It is, if you're the buyer and you want to send a love letter and you think it'll help, you should send a love letter, because if it helps you get the property, send a love letter.
With the offer?
Any way you want, any way you want. If you represent the buyer, okay, you can send a picture of the dog and everything else. You can do all of that and you send it. And if you think that that will appeal, you're okay, as long as you're not trying to do it for discrimination reasons. And how would anybody know? It's what's inside your head. And so here's the way here's why I think I would give that advice to the buyer if they're doing it. It is because there are many sellers who say, we've been so happy in this house. We want someone to be here. We raised our children. We like people with small children who would be. Okay, there are a lot of people, a lot of sellers that feel that way. And if a buyer can appeal to someone that way by simply sending a love letter, you're not going to be able, you should not give advice to a buyer saying you can't do that. Now, if a buyer says, this is an area in racial transition, and I want the seller to know that we're the right color, you don't want that client. You don't want that client. You don't want to hear anything like that. If you hear it, you need to speak out against it. You need to say, I'm not your realtor. You need to go 100 miles away from it. But if someone says, we have children, and when we walked through their house, we met the seller, and the seller made this comment that they have children who grew up in the house, and oh, your children are so darling, I want to remind them that we're the people they met, or whatever it is, okay? I have no trouble. If you are a seller, if you're a listing agent, you should tell your sellers, do not read the letter. I have love letters from the buyers. Tell me not to show them to you. Tell me to put them in my file and keep them and not show them to you. And I won't tell you about them. I won't describe them to you. We won't look at them, because I want you to be able to say, I made my decision as to whom I'm going to sell this house to based upon the offer and what I knew about the buyer's credit rating and what I knew about all the things that I should know about. I did not make any decision having anything to do with how anyone looked or who they were or whether they were a man or a woman or gay or straight or anything else. I don't care. That's what you want your seller to be able to say. And so the advice you give to the seller is, don't look at it. Give me a written instruction not to, and then you have the confirming letter where they simply say to you, where you said to them, okay, you send an email saying, we've gotten love letters from 3 buyers. I've advised you not to look at them. You've taken my advice. Is this correct? They sent back saying, yep, that's right.
There's actually a section in the listing contract now that addresses this. You can have this conversation with your seller and they can agree to let or not. It's the one hand, other hand conversation. We don't accept buyer letters ever. Our team has been instructed not to.
Where does it
but-
say it in the listing agreement?
A lot of them are saying it's
In the listing?
I put in my listing agreement, I don't accept love letters.
Well, it says seller agrees.
Lester,
and
to
box.
me personally,
There's a box.
There's a box and seller agrees or doesn't agree, and it opens up the door to have that conversation to advise them properly and just let them know. Like, if I know it's family, I'll let you know, but I advise you not to take a letter. However, it's your right, and here it is, and then that way you have the conversation.
Yes, and so you following my on the one hand and the other thing, on the other hand, this one I would urge people strongly, don't look at the love letter. Because the question would be, seller, if you want to see the love letter, why? What information do you think you might get? And then you might hear the seller say something, well, I want to make sure that no one's straight or no one gay or no one, I want to hear, in which case you have to say to the seller, that's illegal. You can't do that. And you've probably said that to people along the way in your life. And so that makes you vulnerable to some investigator who goes and finds out that you talk that way. And so if you look at these letters, you're making yourself vulnerable to a claim. And so you shouldn't do that. And if I could change your heart, I would, but I can't. I'm your realtor. I'm telling you, this is a liability generating behavior. Don't do it. That's the correct answer. Okay,
You got time for dual agency?
we do, but we're not through all the questions. Did I get, are you next?
I was next, but you already.
You're next. Go ahead.
You already answered it, actually.
Well, ask it again. I'll answer
Sure,
it
and
again.
I'll ask it in a different way.
Okay.
If your multifamily property is not under rent control,
Yep.
can you increase rents?
That was my question, thank you.
That's the question.
Yes,
Yes.
I think the answer
Is
is
there a
yes.
limitation?
Well, okay, so if you're in California, you are under rent control because there's now California rent control. So you are under that rent control, but that's
But
5%
what if it's still
plus
exempt from
CPI.
that, like a single family is exempt?
Oh, it's
My
exempt.
question's multifamily, it's, and single family is exempt.
Single family is exempt.
LA
Pays the
City
rent.
still has it. I
No,
received.
no, LA City is
Different.
different.
But not
animal.
rent
State.
control.
Right, no,
Not under rent control.
Right.
Your property's not under rent.
not in
control.
LA City or Gardena or or the People's
Or
Republic
county
of
or
Santa
state.
Monica or
Yeah.
anything, yeah.
Because the language, they kind of secretly like don't make it clear. They say, they kind of go around it, so you have to interpret it and assume that if you're not under rent control, you don't have to follow that.
Right, so, but you are under California rent
Right.
control, everyone in California, but other than that, yes.
Okay,
Other
and
than
under
that, yes.
California rent control, is there an eviction freeze still going on? That's.
I think evictions are still frozen everywhere right now.
That's what I thought.
Everywhere, and
That's what I
it's
thought.
not, and they're overlapping, I think
Yeah.
the state, the county, and a number of the cities. So they're all gonna have to come.
And it
under
was
living
federal
control.
for a while.
And it was federal for a while, although the federal didn't have the force of law behind it, it was more of an executive order. I think you're next.
I'm basically beating a dead horse.
We're gonna beat this dead horse
Yeah.
until it decomposes, that's what we're gonna do. Go ahead.
It's basically kind of along the same lines of this eviction moratorium where now I understand that there's the eviction moratorium. I understand that it's being extended until next year, but we don't even know exactly when, right?
And it could be shortened as well. You have the epidemiological science, and then you have the political science. And they're kind of running neck and neck right now.
But if there is a case where, so my client had rented out to husband and wife moved out, they left their son was not on the lease.
Adult.
He has moved several people in who are, no one's on the lease. Things are happening that are eviction worthy,
Okay.
but because of this eviction moratorium.
No, this eviction moratorium wouldn't count for that. So if you have behavior which is otherwise in breach of the lease and it's material, you can evict right now. Again, we come back to the court system is all smashed and broken, so you have those problems. But there are evictions that you can bring now, not for non-payment of rent, but for behavior. And so depending on what the behavior is, if it's illegal and sufficiently egregious or in violation of valid rules that have been published by the landlord in advance, then yeah, you can still do an eviction for those reasons. So we, for example, we are too expensive for ordinary evictions, so we use an eviction mill that just does hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them all the time. And then we collaterally support them for the more complicated issues that they're not equipped to deal with. We just had one who was doing a cocaine lab, whatever it is, or freebasing. Meth lab, thank you, I couldn't remember. Meth lab.
Every office has one.
We're running a meth lab, and so yes, we were able to get them out, and then they were arrested. So it was they were arrested, and we evicted them, serving them while they were incarcerated. So it turned out.
And the district attorney let me out in 3 days.
What are you looking now, Sal?
Just one more thing.
I got another one.
Hold on, did I
We'll
get
need that contact info because my cat has reached out to the attorneys that he's reached out to, won't touch anything eviction related. And it just so happens that he's also LA City.
Send me an email and I will send you the name of a couple of attorneys that do this stuff.
a finer point then on eviction. If it's exempt from rent control, both city, county and state, does eviction still apply to them, or are they exempt from the eviction? No fault eviction. In other words, so there's two issues. There's raising the rent and there's evicting them.
No fault
No fault
eviction.
eviction.
Yes.
If the property is exempt for raising the rent, is it also exempt from no fault eviction?
You run into the California rent control, which says no fault eviction doesn't exist anymore.
Except single family homes and condos.
Correct. So if
So this is
there,
a condo,
that's fine, it's exempt.
so it's exempt from both.
Yes, unless it's owned by a corporation, there are still exceptions. If it's owned by a
So in order to
corporation.
sell, you could evict the person for the purpose of sale.
I believe the answer is yes. I believe the answer is yes.
Boy, it's a
It's
really
easier
fine
for the
line.
buyer who purchased it to evict for occupancy than it is for the seller to evict without having a buyer for occupancy.
That's correct. That's correct. Sal, you have the last question of the day.
We're having a lot of issues with dual agency. I've had fortunately several listings where they were fixed flipper material. And everybody wanted me to represent them. And so I'd like you to talk to us about dual agency and the dangers. I personally, on those properties, if I have a property that hasn't sold in 3 months, I'm happy to be a dual agent. I can get it done. But if it's been listed for 15 minutes and I have 18 offers from flippers, I'm not interested in dual agency, and I would rather refer those buyers out to 15 agents and represent my seller and do the best there. And I'd like you to talk to us on that.
So here's my view. So first of all, let me define what a dual agent is. Technically, a dual agent is anyone who's hanging their license with the same broker. So theoretically, if you represent the buyer and you represent the seller, you're dual agents. I don't care about that. That's okay with me because the seller's going to get advice from you and the buyer's going to get advice from you, and you can advocate for your own clients. So I'm happy with that. That's, to me, technically dual agent, yes, under the law, it doesn't matter. We in lawsuits, when we hear from a plaintiff's lawyer and your agents were dual agents, yeah, great, who cares? And it never comes up again because they know it doesn't matter. When I'm talking about a dual agent, I'm talking about a single human dual agent. That means you represent the seller and you represent the buyer. So for purposes of all this discussion, that's what I mean by dual agency. In your profession, dual agency is legal. It is called dual agency. In my profession, it would be called disbarment. It is for me, and it is for you, an irreconcilable conflict of interests. I've had dual agents who said to me, well, whenever I'm a dual agent, I never discuss price. I stay away from discussing price. Well, you've made it even worse because now nobody's getting advice on that. But it's not just price. How in the world do you reconcile the irreconcilable issue of, for example, the earnest money deposit? 3%. If I'm the buyer, I'd like to get away with putting in 1%, $100. If I'm the seller, I want a full 3%. If I'm the seller in a market that's rising, I want liquidated damages. If you're a buyer, you don't. If I am the seller, I want to get all the contingencies removed as soon as I can, in writing. CAR form CR, contingency removal. If I represent the buyer, I don't ever want to remove any of my contingencies. If the listing agent's asleep at the switch, I want to close escrow with all my contingencies intact. In case something goes wrong at the last minute, I can still get my earnest money deposit back from my buyers. How do you reconcile that? And then when it comes to request for repair, you say to the buyer, well, look, I think we should ask for $10,000 off the price for these repairs. And then you go over to the seller and say, well, you should say no to that. What do you do with these things? There's no way to reconcile it. So then I have two rules for people who want to be a single human dual agent. Rule one, make sure nothing bad happens. And here's what I mean by that. Carry your checkbook with you after the close of escrow. And when the buyer says, I'm disappointed this dishwasher doesn't seem to dry the dishes. Well,
Buy a dishwasher.
let me buy a dishwasher. Let's go over to Pacific Sales. We'll pick out a nice dishwasher. I'll buy a good model. We'll get it put in. No problem. My pleasure. The second rule is don't ever discount your commission. There's nothing more heartbreaking than have a client sitting in front of me and say, I was a single human dual agent, I'm being sued now. And and what I did is I said, well, because I had both sides, I did it for 3.5%, 4%. No, we have one client who in the Brentwood, Beverly Hills, Truesdale area is forever doing trades in the entertainment industry. Ozzy and Harriet sell their house to Lucy and Desi and they trade back and forth. I guess I may have dated myself. And so he's forever doing single human dual agency. And what he says is that he puts in his listing agreements 5%, unless I handle both sides, in which case I get 6%. And he says they agree to it. And he says it's hazard pay. And he says, I carry my checkbook, and he has kept statistics over the years. And he says, being generous, making sure everybody's happy. He says, I end up keeping about 92% of my commissions over the years, which, 92% of a double fee or of an increased fee, but don't ever discount. So 2 rules: carry your checkbook after the close of escrow and generously pay to keep people happy. And number 2, don't discount your fees. Now, by this point, one more fact. The only thing you can do that gives you a higher probability of being sued than representing yourself in the sale of your house, that's where you really get sued and your insurance may not cover you, is doing a single human dual agency. So now, given that, you should each have an individual feeling. And one feeling would be, that's fine with me, I'll do it, I'll take that chance. I hope that that person also says, and I love skydiving too. That's good. Risk taker, it's great. The other side would be what Sal said, which is, I don't want to fish in those waters. When I have a listing and someone comes to me and says, I want you to represent me, what is that buyer thinking, by the way? When they come in, you're gonna get a deal. They're telling you, I think you're such a sack of junk that what will happen is you'll sell the seller short and I'll get a good deal so you can get a double pop. That's what they're saying. So the answer for everybody in that position who isn't a skydiver would say, hey, what I'm going to do, I'll treat you right. I'm going to send you to her or to him, and I'm going to get a 25% referral fee, and I'm going to disclose that to my seller and to your buyer. If you're making an offer, put it in your offer that it's understood that you're getting it, that you're paying me a 25% referral fee. And it'll be all disclosed in writing to everybody. And then don't worry, I'll know that. And the answer then is everybody's on an equal footing. It's out there and disclosed to everybody. And your seller knows that you're going to get a referral fee if that one gets it. And then everybody wins.
Devil's advocate, what if their cash is $25,000 higher than the highest offer and they're coming to you? Can you say, you know what, they are the best buyer?
So fill in more facts for me. Has the property been on the market for a month, or has the property been on the market for 15 minutes?
Multiple offers, 10 offers, and they're in the lead. And they're coming to you. They're like, I want it. I want this property. I don't have it.
Within a week, within the first week?
Yeah.
Okay, so now, this is where you get to make this individual skydiving or I don't fish in those waters decision. Because here's what you should be doing for yourself. You should, when you have, how many offers? 7. When you have 7 offers, you should not be writing the multiple counter offer form. You should not be writing stuff down. What you should be doing is calling all 7 of those people. And here's what you should tell the bottom 6 people. We have 7 offers right now. I don't know if more will come in. Today is Wednesday. Today is Wednesday. Monday at 12 noon. We're going to really take a look and decide who we're going to respond to. I don't mean who we're going to counter to or who we're going to accept, but who we're going to respond to. But I might not wait till Monday at noon, because if someone comes in and makes me such an incredible offer that I can't turn it down, then the seller might decide to act sooner than that. So no guarantee. But right now, and remember, you're talking to the 6 people that are at the top tier. You're not in the top tier. So someone above you or several someones above you would have to drop out for your offer to be acceptable. So what I'd encourage you to do is decide If you're satisfied with your offer, stand on your offer. If you'd like to improve on your offer, now would be the time. Can't guarantee I'll wait till Monday at noon, but we might. But whenever you can talk to your buyers, just let me know you're standing on your offer or you're going to improve your offer and then get me your improved offer. And that's what you should be saying. And then to the top person, you should say, I want you to know you got the best offer so far. Let me tell you what I just told the other 6 people. And so if you'd like to stand on your offer, stand on it. If you'd like to improve it, improve it. Now, how do you do that if you're representing both sides? This is what you owe to the seller, is to have that conversation with everyone. And what you could say is, I will also go to my buyer who has this number one position, and I'm going to tell them the same thing. And then what you have to do is hope that you don't give away in a tell, poker language, in a tell that you want, that whatever it is you wouldn't want to give away. You need to hope you're not accidentally causing some of the other 6 to get discouraged and withdraw their offer or stand on their offer. It calls upon you to walk a tightrope, which brings us back to the skydiving category. So this is a tightrope, no net, or skydiving, whatever analogy you like. I'm not saying don't be a single human dual agent. I'm saying if you are, understand that's the position you're in, and that someone later might criticize you, one way or another. One way or another, they might criticize you, and that criticism sometimes is framed in a lawsuit.
What would it be better if, like, let's say it was Gordon's listing, they're a team, and Nicole represented the buyer, Gordon represented the seller?
Under the same team umbrella?
If they're the same team, they have an identical, it would be like me saying that my wife and I are gonna do 2 separate things. We share money. Once we share money, if you're on a team and you're sharing money, it's the same single.
Just communication wise though, if it was a have to happen.
It doesn't help because it's still gonna be said that the listing agent would favor their team member.
It's incestual.
Yes,
That's
yes.
not the right word.
That's not. I'm not comfortable with that.
I know about meth, but I heard.
What about like new construction?
What do you mean?
Like if you were the listing agent and weren't, like, it wasn't on the market.
Okay,
So what about?
and you
dual
have what,
agency?
multiple? Oh, I see. So
Yeah,
you
like
have.
it's not a
You're not,
platform.
you're not a captured agent, you're an independent agent, and you have a listing on a new construction,
And you're selling it like new
And you're selling
construction
it
with
like
a
new
special
construction.
contract.
and a buyer comes in
Mhm.
and so forth. So you still have all the issues of what should the price be, what do you do with liquidated damages, what do you do with removal of contingencies? What do
Well,
you
that's
do
all, the attorney builds a contract. I'm just talking more about representation, because in that case, there isn't another agent.
You're saying there isn't another agent because there's no agent cooperation.
Right.
Got it. If there's no agent cooperation and the buyer doesn't have an agent, then you should represent the seller and not the buyer. And you should send a letter, and this is the same advice I give you if you're representing a FSBO. You or an REO, you send a letter to the buyer saying, I urge you to consult with 3 people, a real estate broker, a real estate attorney, and a CPA. And I don't represent you, I represent only the seller, but there's no reason to be a dual agent because there's no additional commission to be paid. Don't take on the responsibility of representing a buyer when you don't need to, you're not getting paid to, not getting paid for the risk. Ladies and gentlemen, practice safe sales.
Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you. Thank
Good
you.
seeing you.
What's on
Thank you,
this?
Lord.
What's on this?
Okay, the flash drive has, I have a radio show on talkradio1.com, and these are excerpts of some real estate topics I've talked about. And the green brochure is our law firm resume and the business card.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you. Thank
What's
you.
the radio show?
It's uniquely called the Stephen Spierer Show. It's on talkradio1.com. It's, if you look at the flash drive, if you plug that in, you'll hear excerpts there. And you can go to the website. Thanks, everybody.
Hey guys, just new listings to keep an eye on. We'll repeat all of this next week as well. So if you have a listing that deserves some serious attention, Natalie can blast it out, make sure that the office gets a second look at it. And then just keep an eye on the calendar for upcoming events. The next week will be a more in-depth business meeting. So thank you all for coming.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. That rental, if you want to.
Yeah, but if we're on the MLS to disseminate it on that, it is a, yeah, one of the very small, you know, no marking.